So welcome back to another episode, and today is a very special look back on a game that came out 30 years ago. A small game, I don't know if it has much of a future. Final Fantasy I here was released in North America 30 years ago. Incredible, this is my original copy here. And today I thought I'd take a deep dive into why the game was so important 30 years ago in North America, what it was really like when it came out, why was it so good? We're going to get into all of that for sure. I'm going to share some memories that I think I shared 10 years ago on the show. I'm going to do that again here because it's absolutely fitting. And it just blew me away. I'm like, when I was looking at anniversaries this year, I was like, a lot of 30s were happening. And I saw Final Fantasy and I'm like, oh man, hits me right here. I'm like, can't wait to talk about this game. How many of you have played Final Fantasy I from back in 1990 when it was first released? How many of you were there for that? I was, and it all began, for me personally, with Nintendo Power. This one right here. And this is the May-June 1990 edition. And I remember I was flipping through it one day, and I see what? I'm like, what is this? Final Fantasy? And I was a big fan of role-playing games, and let's state this here so we understand it. Final Fantasy wasn't the first role-playing game released in this country at all, by any stretch of the imagination, on console. There was Phantasy Star had come out in '88, Miracle Warriors had come out as well, Ys had come out as an action RPG, and Dragon Warrior was released as well before this. So I kind of was into these RPGs, but it wasn't a brand new idea. But back then we didn't have a ton of RPGs, so any ones that we would see in a Nintendo Power was intriguing. And I think the name Final Fantasy was fascinating because in Japan, the game was released in 1987 on the Famicom, and it was a big deal for Square. It was their swan song game. This game had to be a success, and it was. They were kind of going on the success of Dragon Quest in Japan, and they were like, yeah, you know what? We want to make a role-playing game as well. And they did it at the right time with the right kind of gameplay, the right everything, and the game was a big success in Japan. But we didn't get it for another 3 years, and we had all these other games come out before it, and it was also the time period. This is very fascinating. Here's where I talk about why Final Fantasy I was such a big deal at a time when next generation consoles were out. Okay, here's the bit where I get to talk about my memory of it. Back in 1990, I went on a family road trip with my parents to San Francisco. And I was a young kid at the time. I got to San Francisco. I had a little bit of money saved. I've told this story before, 10 years ago, in an episode called Video Game Memories. And I got to San Francisco, and back then, things were a little bit different when you bought video games. I went into a computer store, and I'm going through all the bins, and I'm like, okay, I gotta get some video games to come back to Canada with me. I'm so excited. So I bought a video game. One of them was Budokan. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. It's gonna be an amazing fighting game. We'll get into that. And then the other game was Double Dungeons on the Turbo Graphics. I'm like, great, awesome, an RPG, another RPG. I can't get enough of these things. Okay, let's say this. I bought one more game, Final Fantasy I on the NES. We stopped at Reno on the way back, and I went into a Toys R Us, and I saw up there, and I was like, hey, I remember that from this Nintendo Power. So I bought my copy, and I was going through everything. And here's the thing I want to show as well. It came with a beautiful, big map right here. I remember sitting in the car, driving back to Canada, and looking at this map, and looking at all the shots of the monsters in the game. And I was like, wow, this game is really big. There's a lot to do in here. And I couldn't wait to get back, but you know what? I had a Genesis at the time, and I had a TurboGrafx, which were next generation consoles. So I couldn't wait to play Budokan and Double Dungeons, where history will find that Budokan was a terrible fighting game. It was really bad. I tried to like it, I really did. And then Double Dungeons was a huge disappointment to me, and now lives on the shelf right here. It's holding up the shelf. Everybody was wondering why the shelf was kind of bent years ago. Where I put Double Dungeons in, oh my god, must be nearly 10 years ago to hold up the shelf. It's doing a great job. So you can tell that those games for me weren't what I really were hoping for. But I had this small game, Final Fantasy. I was like, oh, well, I'll go home and, I'll play these other games, and I played them, they weren't good. But I'll play Final Fantasy. We'll see what that's about. Start to play Final Fantasy. What did Final Fantasy do that was so compelling and so good that I liked it more than next generation consoles? It was a multiple of things. It was the combat. I loved the combat. I loved it. It was side view combat. You could see all your characters, and you could see your enemies, and I really enjoyed that. But I loved creating my own party, and I also loved that the classes would change over time. I liked that quite a bit. It made me feel that I really could pick and choose my adventurers. And you also had 4 adventurers, which was important to me. And coming off games like Phantasy Star and stuff like that. In Dragon Warrior 1, you only got 1 character, and I was like, no, good, we're going forward. It was also the music. The music was stellar. The music was really catchy and upbeat and mysterious when it needed to be. The combat music was really awesome. So I'm like, good, I like this stuff. I really liked exploring the world. I really felt like, I know this sounds cheesy to say, like I was on this grand adventure. I mean, it was the middle of summer for me. I had the blinds shut, and I'm there. Budokan and Double Dungeons are pushed aside, and I'm totally immersed into Final Fantasy 1. Like, it's so incredible. Yes, there's some things about the game that drive me nuts, especially in combat, where, say there's an enemy on the screen and you get 2 characters to attack that enemy. The first character kills that enemy, the enemy disappears from the screen. The next character up to make their attack will attack the same spot. They won't attack the next monster, they attack that spot. So you'd have so many times where a character would be hitting an empty spot and you're like, no, don't do that. I remember in some of the later battles in the game, you'd be so mad. You're like, no, why doesn't it just go to the next character to attack? But that's some of the small things of it. And then, obviously, we get here the July-August issue of Final Fantasy, where they get a little bit more in depth, and we see some really kind of beautiful artwork going on here. I really appreciate some of that, and this game was really, really magical, and it took me all summer to finish that game. And my friend Andrew down the road, he had it, so we'd always talk to each other about what we were doing in the game, and had a lot of fun that way. And as soon as he was finished the game, he started to make another party, and he really enjoyed that fact. And that was the thing, it felt like it was your own experience. The story wasn't anything too complicated. It was simple back in the 90s. It was very simple. You had 4 characters going up against some evildoers in the world. I mean, that was realistically it. You had the orbs and all that, you had the elements, but realistically it was very, very simple. And I really enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed the graphics, and let's be honest here. They were a step down from Phantasy Star. When you went from Phantasy Star to seeing Final Fantasy, you're like, oh, but it was the gameplay that was really what kept you in and kept you there many, many late nights and leveling up, killing lots of monsters, making lots of money, going into shops, spending your money, upgrading your equipment. These are things that we take for granted nowadays in RPGs. We've seen it so much, but I can't stress how it was a fresh concept back then. There was only a few games doing that, and I loved it for that. I also loved the way you could travel in this game. So you could travel just by walking around. You could also use a ship, or you could use an airship. And the airship was a big deal. I thought that was so cool. I could run around the world and land anywhere I wanted to. That was very cool. Now, is this game all based on nostalgia? Does the game still hold up? I think it does, to a certain degree. I think it's very fascinating for new players to go and see where the Final Fantasy series started at. Look where we're at now with it. It's interesting to go back to the past and see where it started and what it was really like back then. And yes, it's a little medieval. There's way too much grinding, way too much combat, way too much. The whole game is padded with that. But if you're curious to go back and have a look at it, it's a part of history now. And for me, it's a part of a summer from 30 years ago where I remember I can still hear my dad mowing the lawn. The blinds are closed. The sun was not coming in. I was there playing it. And I remember this one piece of music that really sums up that experience for me. Whenever I hear that music, it takes me right back to that spot where I was when I went on that family vacation with my parents to San Francisco. I bought a few games that were really terrible and one game that would stand the test of time that I would be talking about 30 years later that would launch a franchise. And I don't think they had any clue back then when they released this that it would have so many sequels and it would become such a phenomenon around the world. And it all started with this small game here. What are some of your guys' experiences and memories playing Final Fantasy I? It's really something else. And here's another thing I brought out, the Nintendo Power Strategy Guide from back in the day. This is really something else. And you know, even in looking in it right now, I love the maps. I love the towns. There's so much to do. I remember I was playing this game for hours upon hours upon hours. I mean, so many great memories, and oh my god, it's so great to be able to revisit this after 30 years and talk about it. But yeah, let me know some of your memories down below of such a classic, wonderful game. I'm out of here, guys. So anyways, guys, until next time.